Hi everyone, welcome to the IMG IR Match Panel discussion. My name is Andrew Moore, and along with Yi Yang, we co-chair the SIR Resident Fellow Section International Outreach Committee in accordance with one of our committee's missions, which is to educate and provide resources for international students, residents, and fellows interested in pursuing IR training in the US. We've organized today's webinar, which you can see listed here on our title slide, and all of our excellent panelists and hosts that have gathered for today's discussion. Just a couple of quick notes before I hand it over. I just want to note that tonight's session is being recorded and will ultimately be uploaded to the RFS website, as well as the RFS YouTube account for future viewing and reference. Additionally, kind of the format of tonight's discussion will start with an interview between our host and our panelists, which should last about 45 minutes, and then we'll kind of open it up into a question and answer session for the audience. Please note that you won't be able to verbally ask your question. Instead, we would ask that you please type it into the questions section on the control panel for the webinar. And even if questions come up during the discussion, you can just type them in whenever you have them, and we'll have kind of a collection of questions to go through at the end and pitch them out to our panelists to field for you. Yi and I are going to provide our email addresses in the chat for people's reference if they want to follow up with us or have any further communication. Our panelists are encouraged to do so as well, but they don't need to feel obligated to do so. With that said, I'll just give a quick intro to our host and panelists so I can hand it over. So our host tonight is one of our International Outreach Committee members, Taylor M. You can see there in the bottom right of our slide. Taylor's a PGY4 in Dallas at Baylor, and he's been gracious enough to host tonight's discussion. We also have, I'll just go across the top here in order, Alex D. He's a PGY5 at Emory, who recently matched at the Daughter Institute in Oregon. Next we have Fabian G. He is a PGY6 integrated IR resident at Yale. We have Alex K. From New York, who's currently a PGY5 and recently matched at MCVI, Miami Vascular in Miami. And then Mohammed, unfortunately, is stuck in clinic, so may be joining us late, but is not currently on the call. And then we have Brad W. From Larkin in Florida, a PGY5, who recently matched or got a spot in Wisconsin for IR independent residency. So I will note that the top three candidates there come from an IMG medical education background. Brad does not, but has, I think, some good experience on getting a spot in IR that is applicable for those that are pursuing from an IMG background, potentially. So he was kind enough to share his time as well to an experience for us to learn and benefit from. So with that, Taylor, I'll just go ahead and hand it over to you. The floor is yours.
Excellent. So thank you, Andy and Yi, for organizing this webinar. My name is Taylor, and I have the pleasure tonight of being the host. I'm a current PGY4 R3 diagnostic radiology resident at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas, Texas. I'm on the ESIR, or Early Specialization in IR pathway, at my residency. Back in May, the RFS hosted a webinar titled Navigating the Match as an IMG, which, if anyone missed, you can check it out on our Resident Fellow and Student Section YouTube channel titled IR Education. In that video, we interviewed Dr. Attaché, who wrote a book titled Making the Match, a practical guide to U.S. residency for international medical graduates. I believe this talk will complement the previous webinar and focus the conversation more towards IMGs whose goal is to match into IR training in the U.S. We have a great set of panelists lined up tonight from all over the country, and I'd like to first say thank you to each of y'all for tuning in. So thank y'all. We'll start out with a question for the international medical graduates. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to train in the U.S.? Alex D., we'll start you off.
Yeah, so hey, nice to meet you guys. Thanks for organizing this. I think it's a great opportunity. I'm always happy to kind of speak on these issues. So I'm originally from California, and I actually went to a Caribbean medical school. So not the traditional IMG pathway, but either way, was lucky enough and fortunate to match at Emory and then train or going to train at Daughter next year. I actually did all my clinicals in the US, so that was helpful, but I've kind of moved around all over because of SU placement. I went to St. George's University, and I'm sure it's similar to the other experiences here, but hopefully offers a complementary experience from a Caribbean medical student perspective.
Thank you for that. So Fabian, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you to want to train in the US?
So I grew up in Munich, Germany, and I'm actually here right now, enjoying the late summer. So that's why I'm a little sunburned. I moved to the US in 2015, straight out of medical school, because I was convinced that medical training is just a lot better in the US because it's a lot more structured than in Germany. And, you know, people often ask me, you know, but you guys have like a really good medical system in Germany. And I think that's true, but really when it comes to training, there's a huge difference between Germany and the US. And yeah, I mean, now I'm in my last year of training at Yale, and I've never regretted moving to the US. And, you know, right now, I mean, I was just out with some friends here in Germany actually earlier today, and, you know, that are in medicine here, and just sort of comparing the way clinical training is structured in the US compared to Germany really reassured me, and I'm very happy that I went to the US for my training.
That's excellent, and I'm glad to hear you're tuning in from Germany. That's pretty cool. So Alexandra or Alex K, how about you? You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Alex.
Hey, yeah, so I have a very similar story to Fabian. I grew up in Europe, also in Ukraine. Then I went to medical school in Poland, which is quite close to Germany. And then again, for the reasons of better, to my knowledge, better education and more structural system in US for the training of residents, I decided to come to US and receive education here. Also, I felt that if since in US the training is accepted anywhere in the world, I felt that would open any of the doors if I ever decide to move somewhere from US.
Excellent. So the traditional pathway of diagnostic radiology residency combined with a one-year fellowship in IR is no longer available. The three options that are now available to match into are an integrated IR residency, an independent IR residency, or an independent IR residency combined with the ESIR track. Now, many IMGs may take a non-traditional path to IR, and Brad, you're unique in this panel in that you secured a spot in an independent program outside of the match at Wisconsin next year. Could you tell us your story and shed some light on how you secured a spot outside of the match?
Yeah, sure. So I went to Lee Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, so I'm a DO, and my program is small. Actually, I'm the first one that wanted to do IR for my program, and let's see. So, you know, I did everything, you know, that you could do to be a competitive applicant. I interviewed at like 11 programs, and basically, and I ranked them, and then I didn't match. So, you know, I think a non-traditional is a nice way of saying you didn't match. So that's nice of you guys. But you know, nobody likes to not match. Obviously, I mean, it was devastating to interview at 11 places and sit down with your wife at match day and you have nothing. You know, so I actually was. The place that I ranked number one was probably in the top 5, one of the top 5 programs, or at least top 10 or so. And I had a good rapport with the program director, so I actually reached out to him and asked, you know, what happened because I didn't match. And he said that he was really honest with me, and he said on the reason why, I guess they got their first 4 or 5 people, and he said that the reason why I wasn't higher was because of my program was unknown to them, meaning that they didn't know anyone from there, and that I also was not an ESIR resident. So even though all the programs I interviewed at were saying they would take non-ESIR residents, that was definitely a deciding factor. So, you know, and obviously the program I can't control once you're there. So that being said, to make a long story short, the reason that the best thing that helped me in this whole situation was the relationships I developed in SIR RFS, the friendships, you know, being involved in RFS since an R1, you know, and a lot of my friends that I had, you know, around the country knew my situation. So I reached out to a lot of them, and one of them found out about the spot at Wisconsin, which actually it was not even in the scramble. So after the match, if you don't match, you get access to a list of programs that did not fill. And there was probably, I don't know, maybe around 10 or less than 10 spots. And the spots went very quickly. Before I even got a response or got a hold of someone, they think they had found somebody already. So I was really lucky to get knowledge of this spot before it was even listed. And so I wasn't able to actually talk to anyone at the program yet about it, but because it wasn't actually posted yet. And so I guess that it just all worked out, and it was I guess a special situation. But I can just say that what helped me the most was the relationships in RFS in the end.
It's good to hear. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned your program not being known by who you applied or interviewed with, and I know that's something or a hurdle that many IMGs struggle with. One of the goals of the International Outreach Committee is to increase awareness among U.S. trainees of different training paradigms abroad. So congratulations on matching. The one thing that all three of these tracks have in common is that you ultimately will all be interventional radiologists one day. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
All right, and for my next question, we have Alex D. You and I are alike in that we are both ESIR. One difference is that you're a year ahead of me, and you have matched into a one-year residency at the daughter Department of IR in Oregon. What led you to this specific pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, kudos, Brad. That sounds like a heck of a ride, man. But good job on getting in. So yeah, from my standpoint, yeah, I'm very fortunate to have a home institution that not only has ESIR but also has phenomenal training in and of itself. But for me, what I wanted when I was reevaluating kind of what I wanted out of my education and what kind of IR I wanted to be in the future, I really wanted to look for, you know, some degree of diversity. And so we get a lot of training throughout our diagnostic years here at Emory, and then our last year is about 50% IR. So for me, it was more beneficial, and I saw myself that I would want to go somewhere almost completely different from what my home institution has to offer. And so that's kind of what led me down the ESIR pathway.
That's excellent. So my next question, Fabian, you're in your final year of the integrated IR program at Yale, and you're nearly done. So I'm sure you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and congrats to you as well. Can you tell us about how you secured your spot in an integrated position?
Yeah, first coming back to Brad and like, you know, other pathways, you know, what I'll say is like, in the end, like it doesn't matter, right? I mean, there are like many ways to reach your goals, and, you know, at the end of the day, when you get your certificates, nobody cares like how you got there, right? I mean, if anything, I think like a more convoluted way can sometimes show more perseverance and be like more respectable. So in terms of my pathway, when I applied in 2014, it was one interview, right? Like there was no separate IR and DR interview. It was just radiology. But, you know, I mean, I knew from the start, I mean, the reason why I interviewed for radiology because of what I wanted to do interventional radiology. So, and I made that clear from the beginning. So then when I was in my second year of training is when they basically opened up to transfer, because I mean, we then at Yale, we already had then the IR residency starting in think 2016 is when the first time when people interviewed separately for IR and DR. And so they also opened up like internal transfer. So then when I was a second-year resident, I became an IR resident. So then, you know, I just had to do 1 more year of diagnostics. So, you know, to complete my 3 diagnostic years. And then starting last year, I started my IR 4 year. And so right now I'm in my 5th and final year of radiology. And yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, for me, I think I honestly just got really lucky because, I mean, like I said, I applied directly from German medical school, and you know, I had done some rotations in the US. So I'd done like 4 months of IR in Boston and in New York, and I'd done like 10 months of research during my 3rd year of medical school. So, you know, I had some contacts and I knew some people, but I only interviewed for 4 programs, 4 prelim and 4 radiology programs, because I had to fly over from Germany, and you know, it was just finishing up school here. And you know, somehow I got in, and then once I was in, then somehow I was able to transfer over. And I mean, I was always like worried. I mean, like when I applied for residency, I was like pretty sure I was going to get a prelim spot, but with radiology, I was like, you know, 50-50 or less than 50-50. So I was really happy that I got in. And then when I applied to transfer into IR, it was the same thing. You know, there was like many other people applying, and again, I was like not sure at all if it was going to work out, but you know, somehow it did, and you know, I'm really happy with it. But in terms of integrated versus ESIR, because you know, like one of you guys was saying, it's nice to see different institutions. And you know, when I was thinking about that, you know, should I stay at Yale or should I go elsewhere? I essentially thought, you know, like Yale has a good program, and you know, I would like to see something else, but at the same time, I don't want to have to go through the interview process again, and I don't want to like take any risks. So I figured, you know, it's a lot more convenient to stay there, and you know, it's a good program. So I'm overall extremely happy with it.
I like it, and the saying is "good luck favors the prepared." So I don't think it was all luck in your situation. So congratulations on getting that spot. Alex K, I have a question for you now. So you're an R4 that matched into the 2-year independent IR residency at Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute. How'd your match go? Can you tell us about it? And you're muted.
All right. Thank you so much for asking, Taylor. Yes, I'm a 50-year resident at SUNY Upstate and have just matched into independent IR residency at one of the best IR centers in the world, at least in my opinion, Miami Cardiac and Vascular Institute. So I'm exceptionally happy about the results of my match, and I was lucky. And I think for me, the application, interviews, and match this time were definitely a positive experience, and I was very excited to go through it. I'm very grateful to all the mentors who supported me on this path, and there was quite a few people who did support me with advice, with the recommendation letters, and many other things. And I'm also very grateful to all the outstanding IR programs that invited me. So to give it a little bit of overview of how the ERAS application started, how the whole application and match going, I want to give a little bit of overview. So the ERAS started in November, and we have received first interviews invitations around mid-December. And I started my interview trail around mid-January and through mid-March. Because of the COVID pandemic, my last 2 interviews were online, and because of some of the time constraints, I went to 15 interviews. And then the ranking list was submitted in May, and we have received the match results in June. So as you can see, in US, receiving a residency spot is a very long process that lasts for over 6 months. And this is only an official timeline, but I think in real life, it starts much earlier than that. So one of my favorite quotes that guided me through the process was that victorious warriors win first and then go to war. That's by Sun Tzu. And what it meant for me is that I prepared my application, I worked with my mentors, and I deeply explored the IR residency programs much before the application started. So even though I think it seems like the application starts and your search for the program starts when the application opens, but indeed you have to work earlier to get some results. Regardless of that, I want to kind of say that even though you have to be prepared and find the program you want to be in, and no matter how big your grades are and how big your achievements are, matching is not guaranteed. And I would recommend all the international graduates to apply to a maximum number of programs that you just can financially and physically attend to. And I have applied to over 100 programs during my radiology application. And I applied to all the programs during my IR application that could give an interview for non-ESR applicants. And that was about 60 programs this year. Said that, when you do interview at the programs, I would recommend everyone to put their best efforts to each one of these programs, no matter of your plans to how you want to rank them in the future. Because until you match, you're not going to know in which program you will end up. And also consider that some of these programs might be your fellowship programs in the future if you're applying for residency, or they might be your places as an attending in the future. So always look at the programs not just from the point of view of right now what you're applying for, but people will remember you in 5 years when you apply again, or they will remember you after the fellowship when you apply after you completed your training.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that insight. And Alex K, I have one more question for you. You mentioned matching twice, once diagnostic and then once again to higher residency. Do you feel like there was anything in that interim that really strengthened your application?
Yes, absolutely. There was a huge difference in my application during my initial radiology match 5 years ago and my IR match this year. For radiology match, I am just extremely grateful to my SUNY Upstate program and the program director who gave me a chance, because at that point nobody really knew me, and it was really a big I never had any rotations in US before coming here, and I was just a random student from Poland. Nobody knew me, and it was really difficult for them to try if I was to give me a chance. It's much different for the people who are in US and who can receive recommendation letters and some kind of background information when they go to medical school in US. And also the results, I got only 5 interviews during my radiology application 5 years ago, and I actually also didn't match to my preliminary year. Even though I matched to radiology, I did not match to preliminary year, and I had to find a spot already after the match, which again, like as experience with Brad and experience with me, it shows that even when you don't match to part of the program or to program, there is always a solution afterwards. And if you really believe in something, it's going to happen for you. And but right now, it was a very different experience. During my residency, I have worked on multiple research projects already right now, like last 4 years. I volunteered a lot with numerous SIR committees. I was a chair for SIR RFS Advocacy subcommittee. I went and presented at multiple national conferences, and I think that significantly improved my application, and that's what gave me a lot of positive feedback. I also think that the most important part of volunteering in SIR and going to conferences was not just my personal work strengthening the application and adding lines to my CV, but rather interaction and learning from some of the brightest IR physicians and leaders. And I think that IR in general is an amazing and very, very inclusive community where people are genuinely happy to support you and become your mentors. So no matter where you're at right now in the world, all the IMGs who are applying right now, I would recommend you to start working with SIR and attend all the online national and international meetings. Especially with COVID, it's a little more accessible right now. And just try to talk to people, try to learn from them. Either it's residents, mentors, or it's even some students are good mentors. And especially if you can get a hold of any of the physicians, already clinicians, attendings, there is a lot of people who want to help you and who want to bring you to success, as in my case.
That's fantastic, and congrats again. Before I ask Brad and Fabian a question, I just want to encourage all the listeners, if you can type in any questions you might have, after we're finished talking, we can answer those questions. So we'll do a little Q&A after this. So Brad and Fabian, you two are chiefs at your respective programs, and I know you might be involved with the interview process coming up. Do you guys have any interview tips for applicants? Brad, I'll let you start this one off.
So first I just wanted to say, that no matter what happens in whatever match you're in, like, just don't give up. If you really want IR, don't give up and just keep trying and it will happen. Now, I had a few things for this question. So first of all, I would say to practice. So practice, not just rehearsing questions like that. You don't want to sound scripted, and that's not the reason I say practice, but practice so you're not nervous, so you can make eye contact, and so you're not like stuttering, you're trying to think of like something to say. So if you can feel more comfortable in actual interview environment, then it allows people to really relate to you and can feel that feel comfortable with you. Eye contact, if you can rotate at the program, so if you could rotate, I know in medical school, like I rotated or tried to do like a way rotation at like the top 3 or 4 programs that I was interested in, and that makes a huge difference. As well as when I applied for fellowship, like there were a couple of places that I did away rotations at, and it made a big difference as well. Your letter of recommendations are huge. That was one way that I got, since my program was smaller, I rotated at a well-known program and worked my butt off for that month I was there, and did presentations, like did things for attendings. Like I just worked like I was or like I was a medical student, on like a surgery rotation, trying to impress everyone. So like, and I got a letter of rec that way. So your letter of recs definitely help. Research, the conferences, just like Alex was saying, don't just go to present research, but also take advantage of, find out who are the faculty that are talking at these conferences. Some of them are program directors. Go up and introduce yourself and just use that to say hello. You're not trying to bug them, but if you do this over the years, then you just introduce yourself a couple times them and just start small talk. They'll remember you when it comes time for your interview, and it'll give you something to talk about as well. And also strong reasons why you want to go to that program. So if somebody, comes from, because my program's in Miami, somebody comes from New York and they have no connection, they're just, it's obvious if you're there just because it's another interview, or if you have some reason why the program means something to you and why you really want to be there. The other thing, this is kind of something that I would have never thought about until I actually been involved in the interviews as much, and is the hobby. So there's a little section there where it says like interests or hobbies, and I can't tell you how many times like people comment on that stuff. If you have something that's interesting that makes it unique, there's like a 1 or 2 sentences, and that can really stand out, and people remember that stuff. And yeah, I think that's it.
Well, thank you. I really like the practice recommendation. At my program, I mean, it's with COVID, I'm online interviewing, or I plan to interview online, and it's also new for my program. And so it benefits me and it benefits your program. So I'm sure most people's home institutions are more than happy to work with anyone. But back to Fabian, how about you? Any interview tips for the applicants?
Yeah, I mean, so this year is going to be my first time being sort of on the other side of the table. So, you know, I don't know if I can probably give more useful tips later this year, but I'll try. I mean, so what I always figured with interviews is like, I mean, what it's actually about is that if you're an interviewer, you're interviewing someone, basically you want to find out whether you want to work with that person or not, right? So a lot of it comes down to, you know, do you feel like you get along with that person? Is that person interesting? And is that person smart and honest, right? Because if someone is like, you know, looks really impressive on paper, but then you feel like it's not really them, and you know they can't really back up what they're saying in their resume, for instance, or you just don't get along, you know, you're probably going to be less likely to hire them. And there's a lot of like subjective things, you know. Now with like interviews happening on Zoom, you know, I don't know how that's really going to influence that. I think there's like a lot of sort of human interaction that, you know, probably doesn't have the same importance in a Zoom interview, but who knows. So I think that's most important. And, you know, on that note, I think for me, like when I was interviewing, I just sort of tried to be honest. You know, I mean, sure, you know, I looked up the program and, you know, look up some of the faculty, and of course it's great. I think like anyone is like always charmed, like if you happen to know their research, right? I mean, even if they don't want to admit it, if you know something that they've worked on, like they're going to be happy. And then if someone is happy, I think they're more likely to choose you over someone else. So like sometimes like my strategy with interviews is just to make sure that the interviewer has a good time, because if they, you know, because then like, I mean, they interview like, I mean, how many people a day, you know, like a dozen people or more. And then at the end of the day, when they sort of think back, then even if they just subjectively have like a good feeling about the time they spent with you, I think they're more likely to favor you over someone else. But then of course there's a lot of like very objective measures, like Brad was saying, you know, like research, like step scores, you know, like the letters of recommendation. But then also I think what matters, what I try to do like during my interviews is sort of tell a story a little bit, you know. So I sort of, you know, in my letter of motivation, you know, I sort of, you know, I was able to explain why I want to do IR and why I want to do it in the US. So, you know, it shouldn't seem like it just happened that, you know, you want to do this, like you just stumbled into it, you know, like nobody likes to hear that. I think it's nice if you can tell people there's like a purpose to it and like you're on a mission, you know. So yeah, I mean, those would be my recommendations.
I like that. That's solid. And each of you are very involved in extracurricular activities. I know Alex K, you already mentioned your involvement with RFS. Were these extracurricular things y'all did pretty big in y'all's past interviews across the board?
Yes, I think a lot of people did ask me questions about the committee involvements and all the research and everything. I would recommend the only thing that if anyone is getting on any volunteer work or in general takes any additional work from clinical work, if you take it, you have to do the best work you can possibly present. So never just sign up for committee and do nothing there, because just having some lines on your CV is not really going to help. But if you can tell that I've done this, this, and that, and most of the people who are program directors, they actually know if you really contributed to SIR. A lot of them do know, they're part of this committee as well. So they do know what work you've done and if you've done it well. So I would recommend to do maybe less projects, but do them with high quality rather than to do too many and sign up for a million things and then not to accomplish a lot. So, yeah. And the same for research, and the same any work with mentors. if someone is recommending you to do something and gives you advice, it's probably good to follow it and do the best of your abilities in that work.
Yeah, to add to what Alex is saying is, I think like the IR word is very small, and like if in terms of like finishing projects and stuff. So if someone is like known to be unreliable or like known to like start a lot of projects but not finishing projects, that like word gets around so quickly in IR.
It's good to keep in mind, and thank y'all. Now, how about for those IMGs that are a little bit earlier in the process? Does anyone have good advice on how an IMG can find and make the most out of a U.S. observership in IR? And I want to remind you all that the RFS International Outreach Committee has a document for IR observerships or research. And if you're interested, send us a question with your email, please. We'll get that out to y'all.
Man, I mean, I think I'll take this one, but I think that's tough, particularly right now during COVID times. I mean, the next year we're all venturing into a complete unknown, and so I think like everybody else was saying, I know Fabian, Alex, we're kind of talking about this, but really trying to get involved and do something, and I think finding a balance, whether it's in the RFS, they have great projects. If you don't have stuff at your own home institution, those are a lot of things that you can do electronically. But even like, to be honest, like do some stuff that you're passionate about too. If you find, hobbies or volunteer work that you're passionate about that you can, pursue leadership roles. I think showing some level of commitment to IR and then our RFS is a great avenue, or whatever is happening at your home institution can be used as a jump off point to demonstrate that your commitment to the field, and then that may get you an observership spot. I know for Emory, at least, we're doing kind of virtual observerships or medical student rotations, and I don't know what the entire, what every other academic institution is doing, what other residencies are doing. But I know at least going forward, that's how it's going to be, and I think that's going to be extremely challenging. Either way, you're going to be able to get, good educational opportunities. I just think it's going to be hard to kind of, like Fabian was saying, and I'm sure, Alex did and Brad did, but it's, a huge component is just kind of your work ethic when you're there in person, and that's going to be essentially non-existent over the next year. So we have to just be kind of a little bit creative, and I'm happy to kind of have discussions like this in the future because they're so crucial to really make those connections and network, like everybody else was saying too, about just in committee meetings and stuff like that, just to ensure that you're able to stand out and show your commitment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, like it was kind of like when you could do observerships, it's kind of common sense, right? You just go there and you work hard and you're nice to people, and I mean that's all you can kind of do. But now with that possibly not being there, it does make it a lot more difficult. But I think it opens up a door maybe for like more research involvement. I mean, like nowadays, like all the communication happens by email and Zoom. So even if you're not in the same country, you're not really at a disadvantage. So, I think people are always looking for, medical students to help with reviewing stuff, with helping writing manuscripts, with case reports, whatever the case may be, book chapters, whatever. And I think that's something where, I would think at least that's something where you can get to know faculty, get to know people, on a personal level without actually working with them in person.
Thank you.
And I would add to it that no one should get discouraged about application in US just because you do not have a possibility to get an observership, because as in my case, when I was applying from Poland, I have never had any rotations or any observerships in US, and I still got a chance to become a resident here. So I would highly encourage everyone to apply.
Good deal. So one more question I have. My mentor along this path has been a great resource. He's given me great advice, guidance, and he acts as a role model for me. I found my mentor during medical school, and I've kept up with him since. And I know we've read things like people that have mentors are twice as likely to be promoted in their fields. So there's a lot of good benefit with having a mentor. Do any of you have mentors, and have they helped you along the way and through a successful match? All right, yeah, Brad, go for it.
Okay, yeah, so I have a mentor at my program that is very involved. He's also has a position in SIR as an attending, but even more than that, I did reach out to somebody who, you know, is very involved in SIR that's an attending, that's at a national level. So it's a little intimidating at first, and you know, you may have someone tell you that they don't have time right now, but I can say that from personal experience, that's made a huge benefit. It's really made a big difference, especially when I didn't match. It made a huge difference. So I would definitely encourage everyone to find a mentor, someone that you look up to and someone that you respect, and that you basically want what they have from a career standpoint.
And yeah, I mean, what I would say also is like, I mean, mentors can be so many different things, right? It can be people that are really a lot more senior and that you look up to, and that are people that can sort of help you because they're, you know, in a more, you know, influential position. But, you know, mentors can also be your peers. And, you know, starting with the application process, I did my entire application together with a friend. I mean, he was applying for medicine, but you know, we both went to medical school in Germany, in Munich, and we were applying the same year. And even though we're applying for different fields, you know, I mean, the application is pretty much the same. And it just really helps to like remind you of like upcoming deadlines, you know, read through each other's stuff like, you know, 50 times, like, you know, make all the little corrections, give each other recommendations, and practice stuff together. Because I mean, I've seen people, you know, that have applied without sort of having peer support. And you know, it's hard for American applicants to imagine, because you know, there's everyone around you is applying. But you know, from my medical school in Germany, I mean, we're like 800 students per year starting, and you know, I know like 2 or 3 people that you know ended up going to the US. So it's not very common. So it's really important not to apply in isolation, but because you will easily forget something, or you know, you will write something that you in your head you think it sounds good, but then in reality it sounds really weird. And you know, like you have to have like other people look over it and sort of support each other. And then you know, so then going forward, I mean, I would say that I had my first IR mentors, you know, from like doing my some rotations in the US, and I mean that certainly helped. But then you know, now throughout residency, I would actually say that my most important mentor is actually someone who's junior to me in my residency. He's 2 years below me, but you know, he has more research experience and we're the same age. But you know, I mean, with him, I talk almost every day, and you know, we talk about personal stuff, but we also talk about work, about research, about this and that. And then, I mean, whatever I do, I will basically, you know, discuss with him first. And I think that's what a mentor is, right? And like, he gives me advice on so many things. I mean, I hope I can also provide some advice back sometimes. And then, of course, you know, I have mentors for, you know, research stuff that I do. I have like mentors for like the outreach work that I do. I have like clinical mentors. So, you know, I think there's a lot of different levels to mentorship. But yeah, certainly I would have never achieved anything without all the people that have helped and mentored me sort of throughout the years.
Thank you
And
guys.
you never know who's going to be, you know, kind of helpful to your career in the future too. Like as Fabian was saying earlier, you know, our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller every step you take, from medical school to residency, IR fellowship. So, you know, always make sure you keep in contact with people. Even, you know, people when you move on to another training institution, you know, follow up with people, send them an email, just give them an update, you know, on a yearly basis or something. Also, I'll put a plug into the SIR mentorship mentee connection website. I mean, that thing's great. You know, I'm a mentor on there. I'm sure the other panelists are too. But if you're, you know, if you're out of the country, then you can at least communicate electronically with some people who are willing to mentor you.
That's so smart, and it should remind us all to keep up with your mentor and tell them how your match goes. And they've invested time in you, and they're interested in you for a reason. So just remember to reach back out to them.
Yeah,
and so now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to echo that as well, that it's probably better not to focus to have just one mentor, but to try to get involved and work with multiple people, and you will find different mentors for different parts of your career, and you will find for different aspects, clinical or not clinical. Some people will give you better career advice, other people will give you better advice on something else. I think it's very important to have a lot of mentors, and probably the best way to find them is to work with them either in SIR or for some kind of research project, because that's when you get to know people the most, when you work together with them, and that's when they will actually be able to tell them something about you and to, you know, support you a little better.
That's fantastic. Thank you all. And so now I'd like to steer us towards a Q&A session. We've been getting some questions sent to Andy. And so Andy, if you want to come on and ask the panelists some of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys, for a really awesome discussion and great variety of perspectives. So I think the easiest way to do this is I'll just kind of throw them out there, and then Taylor, you can kind of assign them as you see fit. Some of these might kind of have been touched on already, but I'll go ahead and read them in case you know, additional panelists want to give their comments on the theme. So the first one is that asks, I want to ask, how important is the research experience for the IR application? And of course, all of these are in the sentence with as an IMG, right?
Does anyone feel strong on research and want to handle this one?
I have a simple answer, and it's like, you know, I mean, the more the better, you know, obviously, like, I don't think there's anyone that would say, okay, this person has like too much research experience. I mean, certainly there's a point maybe when someone is doing like research for 10 years after medical school, then, you know, you may be wondering, okay, you know, do they really want to go back into clinical medicine? Are they ready for that? But, you know, other than that, you know, I would say the more the better. I mean, it's no question.
I would just add that if you can find something in IR, then that makes a big difference too. You know, when you're somebody and they have IR research versus somebody who's got, you know, something totally related to IR, something's better than nothing though.
And then also you have to be able to talk about it at your interview, because if someone happens to be interested in that specific field of research, and, you know, you happen to be on a paper, even, you know, maybe you didn't like write it, and they would like ask you stuff about it, and then you don't really know, I mean, that would be like highly embarrassing, I think. So I think make sure that you know all of the stuff that you're on, so that you can talk about it.
That's a really good point. That could be bad in an interview. All right, Andy, any
that being said, just as a general thing, I was so surprised. I found all of my radiology interviews like extremely relaxed. You know, like I was like expecting like to get grilled. Like I was like expecting that they would like, you know, ask like really detailed questions, and then honestly, like all of my interviews were sort of more like a little chat, and you just talk about this, like what are you interested in, this and that. So it was very different from what I experienced. So I never had any interview experience where someone was like being mean or tried to sort of, you know, never. But then again, I didn't interview at that many programs, so, you know, maybe I was just lucky.
And I'd like to echo your point. In radiology, you're going to have to spend long days with these people, whether it's your co-residents or your attendings. You don't want to spend your whole day with someone that you don't like. So just remember to be a nice person or someone that you can spend some time with. So Andy, do you have any other questions?
Absolutely, we got a bunch. So some more good questions here. Any tips on networking and seeking mentorship online? I know Alex touched on the SIR website mentorship program. Any other just generic tips on networking from an IMG perspective?
Yeah, I think during the meetings, that's the most valuable place to network. Especially right now, it's all the meetings online, all the conferences online, national and international, and a lot of them are free for residents or students. So I'd highly recommend everyone to join and try to interact with people. There are some happy hours during every meeting. There are some networking hours. So the conferences is one of the most important places to network, and SIR RFS is a perfect place to find mentors.
Thank you for that, Alex.
Another question here from the audience. Can people please elaborate more on getting involved with research articles or projects through the SIR RFS and how to best approach that?
So I myself, we do have that link that we can provide, and that's what the International Outreach Committee can help with connections that way. Do any of you have any other advice?
I think you may start not necessarily with research project, but you can start with any kind of volunteer work with attendings. And then if someone sees that you're performing really well in any other work you do as a volunteer, then they will reach out to you with some projects if they have something. At least I was lucky. I was reached out by several people, and I did do research not only with my institution, but also with several people from different institutions, and like from Johns Hopkins, from MGH, with Dr. Salazar, with Dr. Stadlander from Cleveland Clinic. They all reached out to me, and I was lucky to work on research after I already worked with them on some kind of projects for RFS.
Yeah, and what I would say is it's probably always better to do research on something that you're really genuinely interested in rather than something you think you're supposed to be interested in, but you're really not. Because it's just always going to be a lot easier and you're going to do a lot better if you actually really care about the topic. And like IR is like such a wide field. So, I mean, if someone likes IR, surely within IR, they should have something that they really care about and find fun. Because I mean, like sometimes, you know, I've like agreed to like do something and I just really didn't care about it. And then it's like just like really painful. Versus if you actually enjoy it, you know, it's just a lot easier and you do it better.
That's a really good point. You should try to find something that you can enjoy because you're going to spend a lot of time doing it.
Cool, thanks,
like
guys.
We're all laughing because we all had at least one of those experiences.
Yeah, of course.
That's exactly right.
Yes, we did.
So this is a question that came up pretty often in our last webinar for IMGs as well, regarding when is too late to start in the application cycle, which I think is of particular importance if you're coming from a non-traditional or IMG background applying to the US. So this question specifically is, with a fairly recent interest in IR, is it too late to start building my network for this application cycle? Or maybe would you advise more long-term strategy to hopefully maximize your chances of success on the first pass?
I would probably recommend to apply this year and then put the maximum amount of effort right now in the next month or two, whatever time is left. And if that doesn't work, then you can maximize your work next year. But I wouldn't miss out on a chance, because being too far away from graduation, every year which adds to your years from graduation is a minus. So sometimes people may be feeling better to accept you earlier from graduation rather than having more research or more networking or Plus, it's like next year is going to be your next chance, you know, so don't miss on your first chance.
Yeah, I would say the same. You know, always like apply right away. If it doesn't work out, who cares?
Yeah.
You know, then you just reapply. But you know, often it's just about like getting your foot in the door. So you know, like in my case, like I actually kind of did my application sort of like last minute because you know, as I said, I was still in medical school in Germany at the time when I was applying, and I actually applied with only my step 1. I hadn't even taken step 2 yet, which is you know like a really like a no-no for IMGs. And then I didn't get like my, so then I mean I matched, and then I didn't get my ECFMG certificate, which is this thing you need to get your visa until like late May, and you know I started in mid-June, so like everything was like completely last second. And you know before I applied, I was actually thinking about, you know, is that even going to work out? And I actually reached out to some IMGs in the US, and they said, you know, probably not, like it's just like too tight, like the timeline. But I was like, you know, screw it, like I'm just gonna try it, and you know, if somehow it doesn't work out, I'll just like reapply. And then, you know, I think often what happens with people, you know, even if they don't match into radiology right away, at least they match into an internship, and then like during the intern year, they will meet radiologists, and you know, at least they're in the country, then they can like reach out to people, they can meet people. It's just a lot easier to communicate when you're actually there versus when you're, you know, overseas. And then you know you have a foot in the door, and then like we said before, if there's a will, there's a way, and then you know somehow it usually works out.
Just wanted to add that as far as for IMGs, like for visas, so if you're going to apply to a program, it may help to do some research on if they sponsor visas, because I know, like, so say for instance, you know, Larkin is not the competitive place like Yale, right? I mean, we're not, so getting in here is easier, but probably from an application standpoint, but we don't, my program does not sponsor visas. So that was an issue for us. We had a lot of people that would interview with us, that even great competitive applicants that we would have loved to take, but programs didn't sponsor visas.
That's an excellent segue actually into our next question. We have time for a few more here. How did you, as an IMG, even research programs before applying? Did you only submit applications to places that were known to be IMG friendly or had accepted IMGs in the past, or did you sort of just blanket apply? What advice would you have for that?
I have applied to a lot of programs. I only applied to programs who could sponsor J1 visa, but I did not specifically apply to programs who were IMG friendly from my point of view. I applied to a lot of programs. It was just, I would recommend to apply to as many as you can afford. It's expensive, especially when you're applying. Right now for fellowship, it's a little better because there is less number, just the number of programs is smaller. But for residency, when you apply from beginning, there is a lot of programs. But I would recommend to apply to as many as you can.
Yeah, I would say the same.
How do you find out if a program accepts or sponsors J1 visas or not?
I think it's on ARS or somewhere, right?
They have to call GME, you know.
Yeah, or their
Yeah,
website.
and
Their website should say all that kind of important information before you apply.
And also one thing to keep in mind, which I wasn't really aware of the implications. I said there's like different types of visas. So mainly there's the J1 and there's the H1B. And like I'm on the one you don't want to be on, which is the J1. And like if you have a choice, you want to get the H1B. So, but like way fewer programs will offer that because it's basically more work for the program. But if you can, try to convince them to do that for you.
That's great, guys. I think we have a good last question here. One of our audience members asks that they're applying from abroad. They really want to do IR, but they see that they see how the statistics look like for IMGs with a very low acceptance rate. So here's a high impact question. What is the strongest factor for an IMG to get an interview, in your opinion? And any parting words of wisdom you might have?
So first of all, I would say, like, don't only apply to IR, you know, like, I mean, I would say nobody should do that ever, because you know, I mean, IR is just a lot more competitive, and like, even like most US applicants will also apply for DR. And then, you know, there's also a question if you then rank IR and DR programs. I mean, I've heard of people ranking some that wanted to do IR, ranking some of their DR programs higher than other IR programs because they figured they actually considered it more important to be at that program, even if they weren't an IR resident. But, you know, you can always transition over somehow, right? I mean, we talked about the different ways to become an interventional radiologist, and those doors will always stay open. So, you know, don't only apply for IR, apply for DR2, apply broadly. And, you know, as soon as you have a foot in the door, you know, there's a way, and you'll figure it out.
I would say that when, you know, what I did when I was applying was I looked at programs that maybe have taken like a DO. So like, I know I'm not an IMG, but DO, like if there was a program that has never taken a DO, like, and you can look at by looking back, like at who's there now, and also sometimes they have their graduates, then that was not one that I would have ranked as high. That was just my personal opinion. I don't know if there's any like real science to that, but that may also be a way that you could gauge, you know, or to like direct your resources, maybe not financially in terms of like, I wouldn't say don't apply to those places, but maybe if you're gonna really try and hone down on one to sort of do research with or try and, you know, get involved with some extracurricularly, that may be a way to narrow it down.
And I would say, you know, as parting words, be a realist, but also be optimistic. You know, I think you have to, you know, really look at who one you are, but also what your application looks like from, you know, the outside, and make sure that you can make it as strong as possible. And yeah, don't stop trying. Just be persistent.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. And someone shared here in the question section as well that FREIDA, F-R-E-I-D-A, by the AMA, the American Medical Association, has a good directory of programs with a lot of information about what programs offer, including visa information. So that could be a great resource for applicants now and in the future. Well, I think that is all the time we have for today's webinar. I'm sorry if we didn't get to anyone's question, but I think there was a lot of valuable information shared. And again, I want to give a big thanks, first of all, to all of our panelists for taking the time to be here and share their experiences and being willing to, you know, lend a helping hand to those out there who are starting on a path that you've already been on. Likewise, thanks to Taylor for taking the time to organize all of this and host and get all this great information out for everyone. And thank you to our communications committee and Tommy, who's on the line, who's behind the scenes doing all the magic to make this work. So thanks so much to everyone. Just a few parting points. I put the link to our International Outreach Committee website in the chat. Hopefully everyone can see that. There's a tab on there called Education, and under that Education tab is where you can see our last webinar for IMGs. It's where you can see our list of programs that offer observerships. There's some other resources on there I think are really helpful, and we're sort of uploading stuff all the time for it. So definitely check that out. I also put Yi and I's email addresses there in the chat, and you can see on the title slide here our Twitter handles as well. I know everyone on this panel here has a Twitter presence, so you could always reach out to them privately if you want to. And then, yeah, thank you everyone for taking the time to join, and thanks for those sharing their experience. We will conclude the webinar here, and this will be uploaded for future viewing and future reference. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you for having us.